McCowan. I'm the Assistant Director of Legal here at the Department of Education. We also have Joe Blacketer from the State Board, and John Gabera, our Chief Accountability Officer, and Dan Scott, an Accountability Analyst. We, just to kind of lay the ground rules, this is a public hearing, so we're here to take oral testimony, but we will not be responding to questions. From here, we will consider the comments received, both written and oral, and develop a final proposed rule that will go back to the State Board of Education in a public meeting, and that will be voted on to determine the final version of the rule. We have sign-in sheets over here at the table. If you're going to speak, please, we ask that you sign in. I do have everyone who has signed in thus far. I think there was a little confusion about if you had to sign in just because you were here or whether you were speaking. So I will read the names. If I read your name and you do not want to speak, just motion to me and I will move on to the next name. And I will get up intermittently throughout the hearing and make sure that we don't have any additional names. Also, given the number of folks that we have providing testimony, we ask that you try to limit your comments to approximately 5 minutes. That way we can try to get through the entire hearing today. Also, because of security here at the Department of Education, our bathrooms have, they're locked and you have to have a pass to be able to get in and out. Becky Bowman has those, so if you need to be excused, just get a pass from her and return it when you're finished. Also, we have copies of the rule over here if you need a copy of the rule. There are roughly 60 copies stapled and ready to go. If you have not submitted written comments and you would like to submit written comments, you may email those in to Becky Bowman. She's the State Board Administrator. Her email address is bbowman, BOWMAN, @doe.in.gov. Again, that's bbowman, BOWMAN, @doe.in.gov. Written comments and oral comments receive the same weight. And last, as you can see, this is a live video stream, so you might want to keep that in mind. That said, the first person I have on the sign-in sheet is Todd Whitlock.
Thank you. I'm Todd Whitlock with North Daviess Community Schools. I am the technology, curriculum, and testing coordinator there. Unfortunately, due to the weather, our superintendent and principals are unable to attend due to some bus issues and tornado warnings that we're dealing with down there. We at North Daviess continue to try to meet the needs of our students and hold our students, faculty, and administration to high standards of accountability. With that being said, we understand there are a number of rumors and misconceptions floating around concerning the accountability and proposed 8F rule and pending legislation, including House Bill 1321 and 1324. And we ask that at least some scenarios similar to ours be addressed before the rule is put in place. With the current rule in PL 221 saying that there is not a cap on the number of students taking alternative assessments, and the proposed rule possibly capping it, we would ask that you at least consider those ramifications on school corporations when we don't know what the rules are as we're trying to make those judgments this year. Our school corporation has a high number of iStar students. We currently have 15 students taking iStar, which is above our 1% limit. All but 2 of those students are our students of legal settlement, with 2 being placed in our corporation, as our elementary school is a magnet school for our special ed cooperative. This represents about 2.53% of our population in grades 3 through 8. With that being said, and with the current 3% cap restriction on AYP, which is the iStar and iMassed, we are likely not to meet accountability due to the current rules and proposed rule with cap. We estimate that approximately 21 of the 30 students currently identified as iStar or iMass students based on last year's testing, either in our district or the district they came from, or their IEP placement, that we will have approximately 3.8% of our alternative assessment students pass and proficient, thus putting us over the cap. We ask that consideration be made for those schools that have unusual circumstances in this case, and that we do what is best for the educational interest of the student. We don't have a problem with accountability. We currently are striving and meeting many of the 90, 25, and 90 goals. We have 90% graduation. We have over 25% meeting either the dual credit or advanced placement goal, and we have 90% passing ISTEP or ECA in certain subject levels and grade levels. We are halfway through the year, yet we don't know what rules we're playing by this year. We are asked to submit our ISTEP, ISTAR, and IMAS students currently right now, yet we don't know what rules we're playing by. We don't know what kids we can have take alternative assessments because we don't know what our cap is going to be. It's not fair to our kids. It's not fair to our teachers and our school. We ask that you at least consider making these rules retroactive or not retroactive, because we're making judgments based on rules that are not in place. We hope that the department's intent of this rule and proposed legislation is that it takes effect next school year and moves forward from there. When a score is requested for rescore in ISTEP and ECA, currently that rescore, if it moves from do not pass to pass, is not taken into the school's or the corporation's accountability score. If this rule is passed, we ask that you at least address that and make it fair to the schools. It's only fair that if we're going to be judged, we're judged on the correct data. With these questions unanswered and many others unanswered, we ask that you please consider making the rule moving forward and not retroactive. Thank you.
Next, I have Shirley Wright.
Good morning. I'm Shirley Wright, Executive Director of the Indiana Middle Level Education Association and State Director for Indiana's Schools to Watch, a program developed by the National Forum to Accelerate Middle Grades Reform to identify high-performing middle schools as models and mentors for low-performing, struggling middle schools. And that's what I'm going to talk about this morning, because with the quota in the A to F proposal, you are increasing the number of middle schools, in particular, that will be identified as low struggling schools. They will get the F or D, and they are then eligible for state takeover, which normally results in an outside group coming in and turning them around or trying to, and then it may eventually lead to their becoming a charter school. I want to state categorically right now that we have no problems with charter schools, and in fact, charter schools may be identified, and I have one who has applied, and I've already done a site visit with them. They have applied to become a school to watch. So what I'm saying this morning is that there is an alternative to state takeover and outsourcing a turnaround program. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and so that you better understand exactly what this is. And you have a copy of a document called the Middle School Reform Theory of Action. That is listed as a part of the IDOE website as a recommended resource for struggling schools or schools who are at the status for in the status for takeover. The The vision for middle grades education, as you'll see at the very top, it says IDOE recognizes the urgent need for driving focused improvement of middle grades education in Indiana, and the vision of the National Forum to Accelerate Middle Grades Reform provides the foundation for that work. So already approved is this theory of action, which contains the criteria for turning around middle schools in Indiana who are struggling. We have, at this point, 7 mentor schools already identified in the last 2 years, and we have 5 more who have applied this year. So that could be 12 at the end of February of this year. We have over 50 trained Schools to Watch trainers who can also work with struggling middle schools. They have to be trained by the National Forum, and so we have over 50 throughout the state of Indiana already. In 2008, Indiana became a designated School to Watch state. It took us a year to do that. And this was as a result of the combined efforts of IMLEA, SEL, and the Lilly Endowment. Schools to Watch Indiana now has 7, as I said, and may have 12 by the end of February. Site visits are currently taking place. Of the current 5 schools that have applied, 1 is a charter school. Schools to Watch also has the 36 administrators and teachers trained in Schools to Watch criteria who can work with low-performing schools on site. In October of 2010, I sent information to each member of the state board about the Schools to Watch program and suggested the program would be perfect for struggling middle schools. Dr. Shauna Finley, along with several IMLEA board members, worked together to incorporate the National Forum's vision and the state and the School to Watch criteria into a complete program for middle grades reform and improvement. She received the approval of the appropriate IDOE department heads along with Dr. George Frampton's approval, since the School to Watch criteria aligns perfectly with PL 221. On June 13, 2011, we met with Dr. Bennett, our committee did, and we agreed at that time, he agreed that the theory of action should be on the list of recommended action plans for middle school improvement. Dr. Bennett was enthusiastic about its possible use with schools in the 2nd and 4th year of turnaround status. Last June, June 23rd, I went with teams from the 4 schools who were designated as Schools to Watch for 2011 to Washington, D.C. to celebrate with the other 18 states. We are the 19th state accepted, and to celebrate their status, their new status as Schools to Watch. Our keynote speaker was U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, and I'm going to quote from his speech just briefly here to give you an idea of his thoughts about Schools to Watch. Schools to Watch is doing absolutely invaluable work in the middle grades. They are helping to lead the field in middle grade reform. Groundbreaking research by Robert Balfence at Johns Hopkins and by Ed Source and Michael Kirst at Stanford is illuminating how middle grade educators can both boost academic achievement and reduce dropout rates. And many of those effective practices have been embraced by the nearly 100 schools award winners honored here tonight. For the first time, we have high-quality, large-scale studies of what works and what doesn't work to improve student outcomes in the middle grades, particularly in the 2010 Gaining Ground study and by Ed Source, Michael Kirst, and the American Institutes for Research. The Gaining Ground report is the largest study of its kind. Ed Source and Stanford University researchers analyzed data and test scores from more than 200,000 students at 303 grade schools in California in the 2008-9 school year. Teachers collaborated frequently at these schools to discuss curriculum, improve instruction, and target students for help. They had strong principals who set firm disciplinary policies. They regularly used data and formative assessments to improve their instruction, and teaching to the standards was not a drill and kill exercise, but a way to provide a rich and rigorous curriculum. EdSource's findings are entirely consistent with the policies and incentives the Obama administration has created in Race to the Top and our blueprint to reauthorize the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Congratulations to all the Schools to Watch award-winning schools represented here today because they're demonstrating how to achieve that demanding balancing act every day. They are pursuing the evidence-based practices that boost learning outcomes for young adolescents. Schools to Watch $6 million investment in education in innovation grant from our I3 program supports cutting-edge work. Schools to Watch is seeking to dramatically improve student achievement in 18 persistently low-forming schools in the middle grades in California, Illinois, and North Carolina. This program, this grant has been used so well and has been so effective in these schools and in these states that they are continuing to offer that grant every year. And Indiana can apply for that grant, and I have been encouraged by the members of the forum, of which I am also a member, that if Indiana can prove that they are using Schools to Watch criteria to work with struggling schools, we can apply and get that grant of $5 million. So we have a wonderful opportunity in place to get such a grant and to work with our struggling schools, rather than going outside of the state to bring groups in and pay a large amount of money to those groups to work with our struggling middle schools. And we can work with struggling middle schools the minute we're contacted that those schools want and need that help. In addition to helping these schools develop as an early indicators intervention system, Schools to Watch will, and this is, I'm quoting from Secretary Duncan now. Again, Schools to Watch is seeking to dramatically improve student achievement. No, I just read that, I'm sorry. In addition to helping these schools develop an early indications intervention system, Schools to Watch will also provide a mentor school, a trained coach, to work with the school leadership, and a principal coach. In a number of respects, Schools to Watch innovative model is similar to that of Shanghai's, the highest performing education system in the world. In the last PISA assessment, Shanghai educators also pair up high-performing schools with low-performing schools and have expert teachers and mentors assist their peers. I love the idea that Schools to Watch is trying to replicate success, scale up, turn around work, and make success the norm. Why is the state board approving a new system of assigning letter grades that would increase the number of failing middle schools or struggling middle schools from 16 to 26%, which would mean 1 in every 4 middle schools in the state of Indiana might be in that status, and as to be taken over by the state and turned over to out-of-state private corporations, eventually to become charter schools with no connection to their former district. We have in place an excellent program for these schools in our state, approved by our state superintendent as a recommended resource for struggling middle schools, perfect for Hoosiers helping Hoosiers, which we hear a lot about. I don't think we're Hoosiers helping Hoosiers in this case. What is the cost to the state for this program? Nothing. It is already funded. And so there is no cost to the schools or the staff or the state to use this program. The cost is funded through IMLEA partners Lilly Endowment and the Indiana Association of School Principals. All of you have a copy of that program, and my information is on there. My office is in the Indiana Association of School Principals building, and I would be more than happy to talk to any and all of you about that program and to start work at any point in time, because as I said, we will conclude the 5 site visits by the end of January and be announcing out of those 5 which ones are newly designated schools to watch for 2012. Thank you.
Thank you. Next I have Dr. Chuck Little.
Good morning and thank you. I'm Chuck Little, Executive Director of the Indiana Urban School Association, and we welcome this opportunity to make a presentation today. 2 points of substance regarding the actual rule change. We object to the quota system and certainly believe that norm reference testing should not be the basis for grading all the schools in Indiana. However, I want to point out that in our estimation, this meeting, and I do not use the word hearing, is sending an entirely wrong message to the field. We are the stakeholders of Indiana. Best practices tell us stakeholders should be included. And to call a gathering when only one member of the State Board of Education is honoring us with her presence is a slap in the face to the democratic process. There is no assurance that can be given that the state board will actually listen to the video or read all the documents that are going to be submitted today. We are also concerned that last Friday, a bill began to move through the House that impacted 221, and in fact, the gentleman from Davies County mentioned one of the points that the bill is going to rescind, and that is the parent ability to seek rescoring. So you have a bill that's underway that was only not moved because of conflicts with the General Assembly taking place before the hearing or the voice of the public. Where is the democracy in that? Who are we kidding? It's about time that the people of this state woke up and realized that while we have good and improving schools, public control of those schools is being taken away from us in a very planned and organized way. Be glad to talk to any of you privately. And again, I appreciate the attendance of Commissioner Blackketter at this hearing. I wish the rest of the state board and the state superintendent would be present. Thank you.
Next, I have Todd Bowers. Okay, thank you. Derek Medelman. I apologize. It's Redelman.
Redelman.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. My name is Derek Redelman. I'm with the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. The Indiana Chamber has been heavily involved with PL 221 since its initial passage over 10 years ago. We worked with Governor O'Bannon, various educational organizations to help design and to get the law passed. Would note that when that law was developed, excuse me, there were several primary goals that I want to note for this discussion. First, we were attempting to eliminate the relative peer-based performance measures that dominated our previous accountability system. Second, we wanted to establish criterion reference testing and accountability systems. We wanted to move towards continuous improvement or growth for all schools, including high-performing schools. And we wanted better transparency for the public and clarity for schools. A little later, while working at the Hudson Institute, I worked with David Shane, now a member of the state board, to design the accountability matrix that is currently contained in the current accountability rule. And again, would note a few key components of that. First, it requires improvement for all schools, except those with 90% passing. It was also contained in the law requiring that as well. Requires greater improvement for lower performing schools in order to move the students in those schools towards passage. And yet, it would, the schools with the initial performance levels that were low could still achieve high ratings as a result of improvement, and to the contrary, schools with high initial levels of performance could be graded down for not showing improvement. More recently, the Indiana Chamber has continued to support additional improvements to PL 221. Over 10 years ago, actually, we helped bring in, I was working with Dan Elsner then, another member of the State Board of Education, when we brought in Dr. William Sanders, the designer of the Tennessee Value Added Assessment System, to try to get people to help understand that system and to help move Indiana towards that model. More recently, we were the only organization to testify publicly in support of the A through F grading labels, and we continue to believe that that is an important improvement for clarity and transparency. And we've also supported the removal of the forced marriage between PL 221 and AYP, which was put in 10 years ago only to comply with federal requirements. So the Indiana Chamber supports the transition to student growth data to, one, assure movement by all students towards a criterion-based proficiency goal. Two, to reaffirm the importance of improvement or growth over static performance. Three, to eliminate the averaging of performance data that allows high and low performing students to be overlooked. And 4, to provide clarity of purpose for schools and their staffs. Unfortunately, the proposed model fails on each of these critical goals. The expected growth is determined by peer groups, which means that if a group has a historically low trajectory, then the expected trajectory will also be low. This harkens back to the model that we were trying to eliminate back before PL 221. Passing scores dominate the model rather than growth, which is the whole intent of this discussion. Third, the growth component is based on medium growth, and as a result, students at the high and low ends will be lost as we have in the current system, and thus it is not an improvement over that. And finally, the measures, we believe, are too complicated to be an effective driving force for improvement. Indeed, as a couple of schools had noted to me in recent weeks, they will have to ask the DOE how they're doing in order to know whether they are heading in the right direction or not, because the calculations are too complicated. We think there's an alternative approach. I would note, though, before getting into that for high schools, given that the state does not currently have performance measures that are necessary to focus on academic growth in grades 9 through 12, the conglomeration of measures that have been proposed there may be an acceptable short-term solution, although we would encourage a continued movement towards some sort of academic measure at the high school level in order to use for growth. At the K-8 level, we'd have the following recommendations. First, we'd urge you to restore the focus on criterion-based accountability by eliminating the relative performance expectations that have been borrowed from Colorado and establishing growth expectations that will move all students towards proficiency. That was the goal of PL 221, and that's the goal of moving to a growth model. Second, we would encourage you to eliminate the initial placement based on percentage passing. We used that 10 years ago because it was the only data we had, but as you move towards growth, you don't need that initial placement. 3, we would urge you to borrow a different component from Colorado by holding schools accountable for the percentage of students that, in their terms, catch up or keep up. If you are already proficient, then the goal is to stay proficient. If you are not proficient, then the goal is to be on some determined trajectory to reach proficiency. Fourth, by doing so, you would count every student through the catch-up and keep-up measures rather than relying on medians. And finally, you could then use the percentage of students who are catching up or keeping up to determine your grades. Now, I noted that you would have to develop some sort of trajectory, and there are a number of ways that the State Board would have opportunity to adjust expectations, and in the handout I'll give you, there are several options for you to do that. But I would just conclude by saying the Indiana Chamber remains committed to the criterion-based accountability system established more than a decade ago by PL 221, and we strongly support a move towards accountability based on student academic growth. But the current proposal abandons core principles of PL 221 and does not accomplish an effective measure of growth. And so, unfortunately, we have to stand in opposition to that proposal.
Thank you. Next, I have John Ellis.
Unfortunately, I need to get these out first. Thank you. My name is John Ellis with the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents. Superintendents have concerns around 3 areas. The first, I'd like to talk about the rule. There needs to be detailed test runs. We need to find out whether or not changes make for fair grading designations. It appears that with this coming decision, both decisions on REPA 1 and what's coming in REPA 2, It appears that the State Board has the same aversion to data that a vampire has to sunlight. We need to get over that. We need to start running some tests. We need to start pulling out some sample districts, let the districts know, let them have input on what their schools look like after that test data is run before we make the changes permanent. Does this downgrade students from receiving general diplomas? That was a discussion that the State Board had as they were declaring this particular meeting. A lot of students, it may be the first generation of their family to break a pattern of expected failure by earning a general diploma. Students who transfer to high school as juniors with a small number of credits, many with less than 10, will never achieve the needed credits to graduate with their cohort group. The second area, deal with problems already identified by the State Board. At the August 29th State Board public hearing, comments were made that the problem had created inconsistent federal adequate yearly progress measures to Indiana's letter grade system. Many schools earning an A or a B were capped at a C due to this problem. The board voted to have the department identify in a press release that some schools were reduced to A to C. This issue was also discussed at the last State Board meeting. I didn't see it, but one speaker did note that they saw one sentence in the press announcement talking about the letter grades, but no public correction for the schools that would have received an A or a B. A distorted picture is all that some received. Revisit the issue of norm-based growth measures as guaranteeing unwarranted high percentages of schools get a D or an F. Third, there's a concern that the DOE is moving itself to a position to identify low-performing schools as immediately as turnaround academies. Recently, we had a school corporation with 16 schools. Only one school showed a low performance grade. All the rest were very successful schools, and yet they were approached as a school district if they wanted to basically work with a turnaround agent and work with their school corporations. I think that certainly is a distorted picture, if not an out-and-out travesty to that school corporation and the way they were treated, with 15 out of 16 of their schools doing very well. It seems improper to use two different criteria to make the determination of school status. Further, the law reviews the status to be determined by academic growth, but the current system uses achievement as its basis, not growth, and has been pointed out by many other speakers, uses norm reference data instead of criterion reference data. Again, until we run the examples, we don't know what that difference is, and there is an aversion, obviously, to running that data and to sharing that and putting schools as partners in looking at the impacts of these rule changes. Revisit the issue of norm-based growth measurements as guaranteed unwarranted high percentages, that guarantees unwarranted high percentages of schools that will get Ds or Fs. Could we have the grades of all 4-star schools determined based on the new school letter grade formula? We need to know what the comparison is between the two. Will schools with high percentages of students passing be getting lower grades because they were knocked down due to low growth? Dr. Bennett has mentioned looking at the achievement of the top 25%. We certainly would be willing to do that, and I think that's a good movement to make, but we're doing just the reverse of that at the bottom. Do four-year schools having a D or F combination, does that automatically mean that you're having to face school takeover by a takeover agent, or would the state provide some type of intermediate assistance, recommendations, or requirements instead of the automatic takeover? Finally, take time. We do urge you to take time to evaluate and analyze what has already been put in place before the rules and measurements and indices change yet once again. Thank you for your time and the opportunity.
Betsy Delgach. Oh, sorry.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Betsy Delgado. I'm the Executive Director of Excel Centers for Goodwill Education Initiatives. We serve adults who have dropped out of school and are returning back to school. We currently have 3 locations: Decatur, Michigan Street, and Meadows, which is at 38th and Keystone. We come here today to talk to you about an exception, or exception schools, because we do fall in different categories. My colleague Dwight Ashley is going to speak first, and then I'm going to speak after.
I'm Dwight Ashley, principal of Damar Charter Academy. DCA is a charter school specifically designed to provide students with autism and developmental, behavioral, and intellectual challenges the opportunity to achieve to their highest academic potential while developing practical behavioral communication and daily living skills toward improved community integration and success. Damar Charter Academy has teamed with Goodwill Education Initiatives and Hope Academy, which is a charter high school for students recovering from alcohol and drug addiction, in consultation with DOE in the development of this alternative accountability framework. The proposed A to F accountability system as presented to the State Board of Ed and as published by the Legislative Services Agency for public comment is a good one. It was developed with input from school leaders across the state and strikes a good balance between absolute performance and student growth. However, like any system designed to serve all schools, it falls short in its ability to serve every school. There are a handful of schools across the state that serve very different student populations with exceptional interfering variables that make it nearly impossible for the proposed accountability system to accurately reflect school performance. In most of the cases, it is the reliance on cohort calculations that simply eliminate most of the students in a school from even being part of the calculation. In others, it would grade special purpose schools using the same methodology as all others. What we do not want to happen is for a barrier to be placed for the growth of schools to serve students on the fringe. An accountability system that would discount most of those students in special purpose schools, or whose measurement system would almost certainly result in a string of Fs, would be a major impediment to these schools being created and sustained. Specifically, we are talking about creating a category of exception schools that would use an alternate accountability system, albeit very similar to the proposed system, to arrive at the A to F designation. To become an exception school, the student body of the school would need to fit one of the following general guidelines and gain state board approval. More than 50% of students classified with an IEP. More than 50% of students whose graduation cohort is more than 2 years past. For example, for this school year, more than 50% of the student body whose cohort designation is 2010 or earlier. A recovery high school for substance abuse disorders. More than 50% of students who have been expelled by another school corporation. Other schools made up primarily of students that fit a similar but unique profile outside of these guidelines. As the exceptions show, an alternate accountability system would be in place only for a very small number of schools. There are two major impediments to the proposed system that would be addressed in the alternate accountability system. First, the proposed system makes allowance for special education through the use of IMAS and ISTAR. However, it does not have the detail of measurements for high schools, and there is no allowance for special education students under the graduation and college career readiness categories. Second, the reliance on cohort-based calculations would simply eliminate most of the students in schools that fit the other exception categories. The alternate accountability system would allow those students to be included in the calculations and to produce a true picture of how these exception schools are performing. To that end, we propose the following. Any school fitting the definition above of an exception school would fall under the alternate accountability model. This model would produce an A to F designation of each exception school and would use the same categories of measurement as the proposed A to F model. In the category of special education exception schools, for ISTEP and ECA scores, these schools would receive a waiver to the 3% cap, allowing IMAS or ISTAR to be the primary assessment tool for those students who have an IEP that designates one of those assessments rather than ISTEP or ECA exams. Cutoff scores and levels would be established by IDOE for IMAS and ISTAR to allow determination of performance. The calculations would then be performed as with the current proposed model, except for growth calculations. 3% waiver options are specified in the Clarification of Appropriate Use of ISTAR and IMAS Assessments memo published February 24, 2011 by IDOE, Ann Davis, and Michelle Walker. For the category of graduation, for high school students, the IEP would set the desired high school completion outcome. For those students on a diploma path, the same calculations as the proposed model would be used. For those students whose IEP indicates a different outcome, the calculation would be based on attainment of those goals within the IEP. If the state board and the IDOE develop diplomas designed to give special needs students a more meaningful and relevant measure of their school experience, then that metric would be used instead. For the category of college and career readiness, for high school students with an IEP, indicator 13 attainment would be the measurement. For some students, it would be moving towards certifications. For others, it would be employment in specific settings. Now Betsy Delgado will continue.
Dwight was speaking about a specific special education school. I'm here to speak to you specifically about the other exceptions. My schools are almost all adults. So therefore, our exception is that we're asking to be allowed to look at our students at a grade level versus a cohort. For example, I have students that walk in my door every day that have dropped out of school and are coming back at 35, 40, 25 years old, and they don't fit in a category. Some of them were in school when there were no cohorts. So therefore, what we're asking, or what we propose, is that our students be measured based on grade level regardless of age or cohort. What this would mean, then, it simplifies it actually quite well. ECA graduation and career readiness measurements would be the same as the accountability system that you're currently proposing. However, the measurement would originate with the student grade level rather than a cohort. So for example, the ECA, the only difference would be the definition of who is in the calculation. Rather than using cohorts for a measurement, we would measure the measurement for these schools would be based on grade level, regardless of age or cohort, and the calculations in this scale would be the same as the currently proposed model. For graduation, students will be placed in a grade level rather than a cohort, and when they'll be measured on their diploma attainment in the appropriate number of years, the same calculations and scale would be used as in the proposed model. For college and career readiness, instead of using a cohort, we would again use the grade level, or we would use the definition for inclusion. The alternate model would use graduates as the denominator rather than the cohort. The same calculation and scale would be used as in the proposed model. Again, this would simply eliminate the 4-year cohort restriction for inclusion, because otherwise we would be able to measure our students. They don't fit in a cohort at all. An alternate accountability system looks and operates the same as the proposed A to F system. It is not easier to achieve a higher grade. It merely takes into account the interfering variables and uses a different base to perform the calculations. Relative to all the schools in the state, there are very few that would qualify as exception schools. By an informal count, we're looking at maybe 15. But all of them serve an important purpose. Without the alternative model, most of these exception schools would be classified as an F. Not because they are not performing above that level, but because the measurements and calculations would make it almost impossible to achieve any other results. When we are striving to offer more choices to more students, it is vitally important that we have schools that serve those who do not fit the traditional model. We need an accountability system that does the same. Thank you.
Concetta Raimondi.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Concetta Raimondi, and I'm the superintendent of the Metropolitan School District of Lawrence Township in Indianapolis. Thank you so much for allowing me and other stakeholders to address you today on the recommendation to amend the rules for grading and ultimately determine control of local school communities. I feel very strongly that the proposed rules will erroneously identify schools that are making every effort to address the needs of their diverse student populations and are demonstrating clear progress toward the goal of educating all children well. I speak from an experiential perspective, as Fall Creek Valley Middle School in Lawrence Township is one such school that has the potential to be subjected to state takeover if these rules are approved and the legislature supports these measures. I assure you, Fall Creek Valley is not a failing school. I have been a public educator for 38 years, and it has been my pleasure to serve in a variety of communities, including the Indianapolis Public Schools, Monroe County Schools, Hamilton Southeastern Schools, and Lawrence Township. I can state with authority that all school communities have challenges, some clearly much greater than others. From my professional experiences, I can discern a school that is truly failing the students it serves from one that works with great intentionality to help children overcome environmental limitations and social pathologies so that they too may find success and contribute in a productive way to our democracy. Am I anti-reform? Absolutely not. I have applauded the majority of reform efforts that have been implemented at the state and national levels. I have personally, as a school district leader, embraced and enforced measures of high accountability. With that being said, I am also discerning enough to know when good intentions around accountability are ill-conceived and have potentially devastating costs for communities. I believe strongly the recommendations before you today that grade schools, absent any reference to qualitative data, and subsequently identify schools for private takeover have inherent unintended consequences. I respectfully ask that you weigh carefully the state's good intentions against some very probable realities that communities will endure if an undeserving school is privatized and a valuable community asset is given to an unproven entity. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Vic Smith.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioner Blackator, Mr. Guevara, Mr. Scott. My name is Vic Smith. I retired 3 years ago after 40 years in the public schools, and I currently work as a volunteer board member for the Indiana Coalition for Public Education. And I rise today to express my opposition to the proposed rules, summarizing them in 3 points. Number one, the proposed rules are not categories of improvement as the law requires. In Section 3 of IC 2031-8-3, it says, the State Board shall establish a number of categories or designations of school improvement based on the improvement that a school makes in performance of the measures determined by the Board with the advice of the Education Roundtable. The categories or designations must reflect various levels of improvement. Close quote. Instead of setting up categories based on improvement, the proposed rules base letter grades on performance. The most important factor in the school grade will be the performance of the school on math and English tests. A completely different system based on individual student improvement from year to year was proposed to Dr. Bennett in a joint proposal back in 2010 by the Combined Education Associations as led by John Ellis. But this proposal was dismissed without serious consideration. This joint proposal should be resurrected to base letter grades on improvement as the law requires. Point two, unbelievably, the proposed rules use statistical quotas for improvement in elementary and middle schools. If a school has a high percentage of low-growth students, its grade will go down by a point. If a school has a high percentage of high-growth students, the grade will go up by a point. But here's the gaping flaw. The number of low-growth and high-growth students are controlled by statistical quotas. Every year, 34% of all students will be low-growth, and 34% of all students will be high-growth. Whether it was a year of great achievement or a year of poor achievement, it is absolutely unfair to use quotas for improvement. The use of norm reference quotas in state accountability systems ended years ago, as Derek Redelman pointed out in his testimony very well. Policymakers in the 1990s abandoned the use of norm reference quotas for the purpose of accountability testing because, by definition, only a fixed and limited number will score high on the normal curve. Instead, state accountability policies were based on criterion reference measures, wherein a criterion is set and all students who achieve that level can pass. Limiting success to a quota of 34% is not fair and guarantees a quota of 66% that will not make the grade. Yet that unfairness is being embedded in the new criteria for school letter grades for elementary and middle schools. Point 3. The results unfairly punish the performance of Indiana's elementary and middle schools. Using current data, the State Board was told on November 7th that these criteria produce D's and F's as follows. Elementary and middle schools, 26% D's and F's. High schools, 16% D's and F's, making a grand total of all schools, 24% D's and F's. Now please compare to last year. The same elementary, middle schools, the same data run with the old system produced 19% D's and F's. So we've moved from 19% to 26% with just a change of data, a change of the rules. That's about 100 more elementary and middle schools that would be in jeopardy based on this new system. And I believe the heart of the problem is these norm reference quotas. And now you can compare us in some other ways. Dr. Bennett has used two other places as models for letter grades, Florida and New York City. The Florida system produced 7% D's and F's in 2010. New York City produced 19% D's and F's. And yet, all of this, under other proposed rules approved by the State Board, D's or F's could lead to state takeover, as Dr. Raimondi just mentioned. This is a huge new consideration for D schools. So these numbers reveal a deep problem with the proposed rule. National assessment data for 2010 clearly show that on the same national assessment test, Indiana schools scored better than Florida or New York City. There is no factual basis for concluding that our schools deserve lower grades than Florida or New York City, and I've attached the data on the back side of the sheet to show that. There's no reason to think that Indiana should have 7% more elementary and middle schools failing than in 2011, this past year. Using the same data, schools get lower grades than last year, and that should not be. Middle and elementary schools should not be failing at a much higher rate than Indiana high schools. Quota statistics should not be used to grade elementary and middle schools lower than high schools. Most states will shake their head in disbelief at the thought of judging success and failure limited to 34% based on quotas in the normal curve. So these proposed rules need a major overhaul to bring justice to all schools. Thank you very much.
Ed Eiler.
Good morning. Joe, good morning. Ed Eiler, Superintendent of Schools in Lafayette. And I come this morning as a superintendent of a school district who approximately 4 years ago looked at a school that was on the brink of being taken over by the state of Indiana. And I'm happy to report that 3 years later, the school came in second as the nominee for Title I Distinguished School in the state of Indiana, has been named a 4-star school. I have some idea of what it takes to make the change in a school to make it a high-performing school. It takes at least two things. It takes time, and it takes resources. I would echo what you've heard from many of the testimonies so far. I think Joe knows when I was on the state board that testing was a particular concern to me. I'm glad to see that we moved to a growth model for students. I think it's the information of the growth model for students is appropriate. It is totally inappropriate when applied to schools because that criteria or that assessment must be criterion based. It is the only way that you can look at schools and try to assess their performance, and student performance is to do it on the basis of criteria, which I think Derek and others have testified that it has to be criterion based. I want to talk a little bit about some of the timing about all of this. It appears as though the rule is trying to be promulgated in coordination with the attempt in the legislature to change the law to allow the schools to be added to the F schools to make it the two lowest performing categories. And when that legislation is passed, you could then immediately promulgate the rule, and you could have the rule in effect almost immediately. Some of the concerns that I have is, one, you've had the old criteria. We have a school that is a D school according to the old criteria, and we're told we're stuck with the old criteria. Under the new criteria, they would certainly not be a D because it's just two grade levels. One whole grade leaves, another whole grade comes in, and because of the variance of the student performance, you can see a marked change in the performance of a school in 1 year. And here we are in talking about this rule in January. We test in May. There isn't a whole lot of time to do something. Obviously, we not exactly in crisis mode, but we are certainly trying to do some things with reference to looking at the achievement of that school. I think that the idea that we would have 3 or 4 months and no other period of time to change the rule, and we're using the old criteria to define a school as a failing school that would be subject to state takeover, the timing is bad. The implementation of the rule in terms of when it's going to be promulgated is certainly something of concern, particularly as we move forward. And part of what we're also working at is with a school who is low performing. One of the things you need to know is, okay, what are the standards that have to be met? And we're now going through a period we're transitioning to new Common Core standards. And during that transition, there is always some issue about, okay, exactly what's going to be taught and exactly what's going to be tested. And I think to put schools in that position with such a short time frame during this period of transition to Common Core is not advised. I think that another concern that we have with looking at the DOE's Q&A page about who's going to be included, one of the concerns that you have, if you start with performance and you say, okay, who's going to be counted? Right now it says if you're there on test day, your score is counted. That means if you're there 3 days, your test score is counted. If you're there 10 days, your test score is counted. If you're there 50 days, your score is going to be counted as the base of performance for the school. All the other measures, at least the state and federal, it's 126 or 162. There's some qualifier as to length of time. But right now, when you have mobility as much as we do, where 40% of the students transfer in and out of the school during the course of a year, to not consider that as a part of the calculus in terms of if you're going to do some performance data, I think is a concern. I think that the final concern that I have is we are evaluating schools A to F, but the only thing we're using is language arts and math scores. And I'm here to tell you there's more to a school than language arts and math schools, that there has got to be some other qualitative measures. Surely we're capable in the state of coming up with additional criteria and additional measures that paint a picture of a school more completely than merely looking at the language arts and math schools and labeling a school as either D or an F school. I would encourage the state board to seriously listen to the testimony that you've had, that you delay any kind of changes in rule until you can establish some criteria, reference tests, and measures that can be used. 2, that you delay implementation until at least whatever new criteria you're going to be in place is clearly in place and you're not trying to use old criteria and new criteria. that you give time for schools to make the improvement, because in our case, we made AYP 3 years in a row. And I think that it takes time, energy. And the other thing that I would ask the state board to consider is broadening the scope of criteria to go beyond just merely looking at assessment measures. Thank you very much.
Karen Combs. Karen Combs.
Good morning. My name is Karen Combs. I live in Lafayette, Indiana, and I'm the Director of Elementary Education for the Lafayette School Corporation. I cannot pretend to be a statistician, but I am an educator. My parents and public school teachers instilled in me good common sense, and hopefully that was an attempt to try to prevent me from making large mistakes. I still make them, but I try to make my mistakes as small as possible. However, I do want to ensure not to make errors in the first place. Even without a math degree, I can look at the formula that constitutes the proposed use of the Indiana growth model and tell you this does not make good sense. While it is clear the state is aiming for high growth, what state would not recognize maintaining average growth as productive? Can students keep up the pace of being high growth every year? What if they just make a year's growth? Shouldn't the school be rewarded for that in the process? Why are we using a bell curve model? This model ensures that there will always be students that continue to fail each year, no matter what. This is a model set up for school failure rather than school success. It seems to me there'd be a way to use the Indiana growth model as criterion referenced, but this is using norm referenced model. Schools and students will always fail. When this model is presented to parents, they are usually extremely confused, and they ask why the state wants students to fail every year. I can only respond, I do not know. Again, it doesn't make sense that the state would want a large amount of schools to fail and be taken over by private groups each year, unless there is an unseen motive. Currently, I can't tell a parent how much their child needs to grow that year in order to be high growth, average growth, or low growth. Instead, I have to wait till the test results come back to see what happened. This isn't a fair system for parents or for children. And I know we haven't talked about the children much, but I want to let you know that last week I was at a school doing morning arrival, and a little third grader got out of the car, and she looked at me and hugged me, and the first thing she said to me after I said good morning was, "I'm really, really worried for the I-step, Mrs. Combs. I hope I pass." And that's a third grader starting in January to worry about a test. This rule does not believe the best for our schools either. I'm very concerned that 26% of elementary and middle schools will be a D or an F each year. Only 16% of high schools will be on this list. Why the inequity? What are you going to do when there are no public schools left, because all schools will eventually fail? Why are we basing passing and failing schools on a quota instead of actual achievement? The use of quotas in history has not been overly favorable. From the U.S. quotas on immigration during World War II to the 1991 decision to no longer allow affirmative action, the use of quotas is not fair. We need to ensure our schools and our students are awarded for true improvement and not punished because they've hit a certain percentage on a bell curve. It is for this reason I urge the board not to approve this rule until this inherent flaw is fixed. Thank you.
Tony Lux.
Good morning. My name is Tony Lux, Superintendent of Maryville School Corporation. One of the purposes of the School 8F grading formula seems to be to rank order our schools from the best to the worst. However, I think we need to examine what is meant and what is truly represented by the best and the worst. First, we must consider and recognize that our current definitions of best and worst are similar to when coaches get too much credit for success due to having superior athletes and other coaches too much criticism because they have less than stellar athletes. So too, some schools are being ranked as the best when in fact a great proportion of success is due to the advantages afforded students of wealth and students who are raised in highly stimulating home environments free of trauma and the debilitating effects of social inequities and personal trauma. Other schools are ranked as the worst because they are challenged with educating society's most disadvantaged youth. Let me clarify that I do not simply mean poverty and race, although they are the two largest components of the achievement gaps. Because there are incredible and myriad examples of children in poverty being successful due to the influence of their teachers and their parents. Rather, I'm referring to children who experience debilitating, non-stimulating home environments due either to poverty or to experiences of neglect, lack of parental education, emotional or physical trauma, and who have severe deficiencies of vocabulary, language, numeracy, and mental processing. Under the proposed 8F formula, even more of these schools will be unfairly and unreasonably labeled as our worst with ineffective teachers, when in actuality, they are a lifeline for these children. While the deficiency of these students are real, the causes of these deficiencies and the blame for not overcoming those deficiencies are grossly exaggerated and misplaced on the schools and the teachers. The expectations and public persuasions are that if these disadvantaged students are not brought to the same level of achievement as advantaged students within just a few short years, and without state-provided resources to overcome those societal and familial disadvantages, then those schools and teachers should be labeled as failing. What is lacking here is the realistic awareness that what we are labeling as the worst and failing schools more appropriately should be empathetically recognized as our most challenged schools. They and their teachers should be supported with the greatest amount of supervised support and intervention rather than be vilified and labeled as failing. I want to refer now to several specifics about the 8F formula. First of all, imagine that you're enrolled in an academic class. The teacher gives you a syllabus and clearly identifies the content you have to learn. Then the teacher tells you that no matter how high everyone scores on their tests, the grade distribution will always limit the number of A's and B's, and there will always be a fixed percentage of students who get D's and F's. Not only that, but if you get a D, you will still be considered as failing. This is exactly what the new state 8F formula is proposing. First of all, schools that receive a grade of D should not be considered equal or comparable to schools who receive a grade of F, nor should they be subject to the same consequences and accountability measures. The reason is the proposed formula puts too much weight on the norm-based growth measures. A school with 79% of its students passing I-STEP could become a D school simply because its lowest performing students are not in the state's definition of high growth, which is based on relative performance of students, not on progress towards reaching a fixed grade level criteria. Second, the percentage of students allowed to take IMAST or I-STAR should be increased for schools that actually have a high percentage of severely challenged students. Not all school populations have the same percentage of those challenged students, and the reality is that some schools have more than others. The state formula is based on the faulty assumption that all schools should have the same limits regardless as to whether they actually have more severely challenged students. Regarding high school graduation rate components, there's a bonus for percentage of students who receive academic honors and international baccalaureate diplomas. Another component provides a bonus for percentage of students who pass advanced placement exams, get dual credit, or pass international baccalaureate exams. Another component penalizes schools who have too many students receiving a general diploma. These components are biased in favor of high wealth schools with highly advantaged and blatantly biased against schools who serve low wealth disadvantaged students. Of course, everyone wants to see advantaged students disadvantaged students receive higher level diplomas, but to penalize schools that are raising graduation rates and negating that progress because the percentage of general diplomas, which in themselves is often a significant accomplishment, is a gross disservice. Also, work certification component should also include work keys as a certificated method of showing workplace readiness. Fourth, high schools should be able to exempt from the graduation cohort any transfer students who enroll in a high school at a time where it is mathematically impossible for the students to graduate. High schools should not be held responsible when students transfer in as juniors with only 10 credits towards graduation. Allowing reduced high school graduation rates for such students is another example unfairly marking down more challenged schools' performances. The growth model component of the state grading formula is norm-based measurement comparing students across the state rather than calculating student growth towards reaching grade level. The projections are that there will be fixed normal distribution of school grades regardless of how well all schools improve. The grading formula almost ensures there will be 25% of schools receiving D's and F's and considers that all those schools are therefore failing. The opportunity for schools to achieve high grades and avoid failing should not be artificially limited as the state formula proposes. All growth of the bottom 25% should be recognized and are not artificially limited to just the top 25%. With the state grading formula, Indiana, as has been mentioned, would have a higher percentage of failing schools than other states, despite Indiana outperforming them on the National Assessment of Education Progress. It is illogical and inappropriate to purposely limit and predetermine the percentage of schools getting good grades and then criticize the other schools who cannot break into the top categories because no matter how good everyone gets, there's always going to be a rank ordering with fixed percentages of schools considered as failing. I urge the State Board to, number one, hold off until more study is being done and analysis done to the effects of the proposed grading formula, and also to provide opportunities for pilot programs from various areas of the state to investigate other opportunities or options. One such was from Northwest Indiana, the Regional Education Employer Alliance for Developing Youth, or READY, partners through One Region, One Vision, consists of representatives of Northwest Indiana business employers, the Northwest Indiana Forum, Quality of Life Council, Workplace Innovations, Northwest Indiana Community Foundations, university officials, and K-12 school officials. This organization has representation from 3 counties in Northwest Indiana and has been carrying out a dialogue aimed at improving the level of achievement in college and career readiness of high school graduates. This organization is focused on identifying accurate measures of student growth, increasing opportunities for students to be better prepared for college through high-quality, dual-credit opportunities, and increasing preparation and identification of workplace-ready skills in high school graduates. It is the position and request of this organization that the State Board consider a proposal for a pilot program supported for school participants of READY to use a more appropriate measure of student growth towards college readiness through the use of the ACT sequence of assessments, beginning as early as grade 7 and continuing through the high school ACT college entrance exam. This sequence offers a much more statistically reliable measure of growth towards college readiness than is currently being proposed, and in addition, it is also proposed that work key certificates from ACT be acceptable and recognized measures of high school workplace readiness. Representatives of READY would be available at the State Board's convenience to make a more detailed presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Steve Baker.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today. My name is Steve Baker. I'm principal at Bluffton High School, past president of the Indiana Association of School Principals, and I'm an original member of the High School A to F Accountability Model Committee that had Jeff Zering serving as chairman. Our goals for this committee from the very beginning were to create a fair and equitable model that represented a true picture of our high schools, to create a model that did not create a have versus have not scenario based on the socioeconomic status of the school system, and to create a model that leveled the playing field, which emphasized success, which is defined as performance and growth. I believe the current proposed rule for the high school does a pretty good job of these goals, with one exception. In order for these goals to be met, the committee intentionally left the graduation piece of the model to be a simple calculation. It was based on simply the graduation rate, plus taking into consideration the special needs students have, an IEP which provides that those students are not expected to earn a high school diploma and is on track to receive a certificate of completion. The total number of these students excluded is limited to 3% of the graduating cohort. This is where the calculation of the graduation rate should end. General diplomas, with or without waivers, and academic honors diplomas were never part of the original calculation for the following reasons. First of all, the economic makeup of a community largely determines the number of academic honors diplomas and general diplomas. You just heard Mr. Tony Lux from Maryville address that. He did a very good job. I will not repeat his findings with that. General diplomas still have value today. At a recent state school board meeting, an executive from Cummins testified to this fact. In fact, he was asked point blank, do you hire students who have general diplomas? He said yes. They have value to his corporation, so they must have value to us as well. Punishing schools for their general diploma rate discriminates against schools with a high free and reduced lunch percentage rate. And diploma waivers are still necessary for students with an IEP who will also earn a diploma but have difficulty passing the ECAs. Schools with a certain percentage of diploma waivers are being punished in this latest version of the model. If certain schools are abusing this waiver process, then target those schools that have excessively high waiver rates. Adding waiver and general diploma together and then punishing a school for that, for having too high of a rate, sends a strong message that they do not have value to the student or school. The solution is simple. Simply look at the graduation rate only without general diplomas or academic honors diplomas. Again, I do support the majority of the high school A through F accountability model. However, the issue of punishing schools for having a high general diploma rate must be addressed. The way the proposed rule is set up now, the top 25%, the highest rate, top 25% of general diploma and waivers of high schools will always be punished. And you've heard several testimonies regarding the use of quotas and how unfair that is. I am not here to make excuses this morning, but I do believe in reality. To ignore this reality would be not doing justice to our students and to our schools. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Todd Bess.
Good morning. Todd Bess, Associate Executive Director with Indiana Association of School Principals. And much has been made over the different growth model issues and quotas, so I won't go into all of those details. I would support, however, what Steve Baker just testified to with regards to the general diploma. I, too, was a part of that original committee and worked hard at that, and much to our surprise when that detail then was included in the latest iteration. Also, on the growth model point, it is true. About a third of the kids every year would have low growth. And I guess the state board's goal of 99, 90, 25, 90, all of a sudden when we get to that 90% rate, we still have all these kids with low growth, thus lowering their school's grade. That's an interesting contradiction, I think, and should be examined with the points that have already been made. Some technical points, though. I would recommend that you clarify the language dealing with increasing the weight of the college career readiness factor that's referenced on page 3, section 4D. And I guess I state it this way. Indiana principals have stepped up to meet the challenges that all the legislative changes have brought forth this school year. And when what we hear from them is, tell us what we need to do with some clarity, and we can try and meet those challenges. Now, they may not agree totally with this model, but an ambiguity that exists there it limits their ability to address what's needed in the community. So they're using the language at least in that language makes it difficult for them to predict where they need to be. The language states that in 3 years, 12-13 to 14-15, the College of Career Readiness weight is to increase from to increase 2.30 from its current weight of 0.10. It also says that by 14-15, the weight shall be at 0.30. So it appears to have a contradiction there. If the desire is to have the weight at 0.3, then in 2 years, not the 3 years as stated, the weight would have to increase an average of 0.10 each year. Yet the language is talking about increase at least 0.05. The DOE needs to clarify this section, allow principals and schools to make program adjustments, and that's much different than individual adjustments. Program adjustments to reflect the emphasis that there's going to be placed on college and career readiness. We'd recommend that the language state how much the weight will increase each year so that it's not a moving target, and that the weight be at 0.30 if that's the will of the state board by the 15-16 school year. This will allow the full 3-year realistic phase-in of this indicator as originally written, and a subsequent decrease in the weight of the English 10 and Algebra 1 ECA test results. At the elementary middle school level, that language should be clarified with regards to points a school may earn for their language arts and math final scores. Given that a school could demonstrate high growth of 2 subsets of students, the bottom 25% of kids and the remaining 75% of kids, and not have any points deducted because they did not have the low growth, a school should have the ability to earn more than a 4.0 for each score in either language arts or math. A school that starts at a 2.5 in performance, yet is seeing high growth from their 2 subsets of kids, should read then a 4.5, gaining 2 points. And that could still be stated as an A. That calculation can then be combined with the other subject area score to represent the final average score. This allows the school to earn a final grade that's really representative of what is being accomplished in that school based on both performance and growth. That's the direction of the state board. We have seen the impact that CAPS have on when they're placed on school accountability. And this issue should not arise in Indiana when we're trying to provide clarity to our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Roy Vanderford.
Good morning. My name is Roy Vanderford, and I'm with the Center of Workforce Innovations in Northwest Indiana. We're a workforce development organization. But I'm here today to speak on behalf of the READY initiative that Dr. Tony Lux from Maryville already mentioned. READY is an acronym, like all good initiatives. Stands for Regional Education and Employer Alliance for Developing Youth. Today we have in the room, largely I would say, an inside baseball conversation going on at a time when we might want to be reading the book Moneyball or seeing the movie if we want to wait for the movie. There are influences that we need in this room, and one of those influences from the employer community. Employers don't have the patience for much of the conversation that's going on about grading systems, but they do have the patience to stay at the table, as we're proving in Northwest Indiana, on the right topics. If we're able to provide the right kind of translation. Most of the topics that I want to comment on today from the employer perspective are contained in Section 5.3W, College and Career Readiness Scoring. The language that we've been able to use in Northwest Indiana has been one of bringing educators and economic development people, workforce development people, and employers to sort of the same set of conclusions and recommendations for moving forward. And we will be working closely with the Department of Education on some of those broader recommendations, even beyond the scope of today's conversation. I mean, I'm happy to say that, that I can use words like formative, summative, lexiles even in a sentence now. And many of our employers can too. And it works both ways. Many of the educators are using business terms now so that they know how to speak and connect to the business community, which we think is important. One thing that does set the business community apart, though, is what I like to call the need for speed, urgency, in addressing some of the connections that need to occur between K through 12 and higher education with the skill needs of the business community. We can't talk to them very often about something we're going to pilot in 2014 and fully implement in 2017. They typically throw up their arms and say, we can't wait that long, we'll be out of business. So even though we we know that it takes that length of time sometimes to fully implement some of these things, we have to talk to them about what we're going to do tomorrow afternoon and what we're going to do in the upcoming year to help us get there and show that we're setting the right benchmarks year to year for making those kinds of progressions. I sound like I'm recommending books today, but everybody should read, I would suggest, The Coming Jobs War by Jim Clifton, if you haven't. He's chairman and CEO of the Gallup organization and lays out a very good case for some of the urgency that we need. And I think this provides a very good backdrop for several specific recommendations that we want to make related to the scoring standards. One thing that really jumped out in the book was when he said, if we don't fix the problem fast, we're going to lose this current war. And even more deadly, he suggests, the spirits and hopes of students are being irreparably broken. And that we view as the core problem, that we have to put in front of students through our employers a clear vision of what the payoff is, a clear vision of how they get there, something they can see that they're doing in school that gets them to a good job, a good life, good income in the region. And so most of what we support is with that backdrop in mind. First of all, under that section I referenced earlier, we enthusiastically support the metric on early college credits. We believe that's essential. We've had a task group that's been working on dual credit and other means of doing that. And we believe that's very important, particularly for what we sometimes call the forgotten middle student. And many of those students will be, frankly, a mixed bag. They may need remediation in something like math while they're also able to get dual credits in English. And that's okay. We need to deal with both those things, and we need to deal with them both at the same time. We do believe we need to do the dual credit offerings, and we're trying to get a good baseline and acceleration benchmarks as we move forward to do that, because we believe we need to give them all a head start on college. We also heartily endorse the metric on industry certifications, and we believe our employer community has a lot more they need to do on working with our schools to provide those kind of certifications. And we think that's particularly important with some of the students who are just getting general diplomas. They need general diploma plus. Everybody's going to need something. Everybody's going to need that head start on employment and also the head start on further post-secondary education. Third, we're probably most excited about the category called Other Benchmarks Approved by the Board because we believe there's a lot of room for creativity there. And we would heartily recommend exercising some of that creativity in several ways. One, work keys. We believe work keys is a strong translation device that business understands. They can see the direct links between the scoring there and what that means to a lot of jobs that have already been rated and scored, occupations in their organizations where they can see what the direct connect is. We also would like to work with the Department of Education on approaches to what we call portfolio development. We work with language on that. Employers talk about resumes, and high schools talk about transcripts, and the world in between, we hope, is a portfolio or demonstration product that we would like to engage employers even more in being the scoring mechanism for that by review of the demonstrations and the portfolios. They're not hiring students, they're hiring young adults who bring them things that can be used and put to work in their organizations. And those students need to show up demonstrating that they can do those things. Many of those things are gained outside of school, but we need to capture them and present them to employers in that way, and we need to have a process that highlights that for the employers so that they can see them. Fourth, and Dr. Lux already mentioned this as part of what we'll be talking to the Department of Education about, is there's agreement between the employers of the Northwest region and the educators that the process we're using grades 7 through 12 right now for doing assessment is not necessarily geared toward career readiness. It's not a progression that is a thoughtful one that allows for real-time adjustments in the students' plans to get them to where they want to be, which includes very strong career planning as part of that. So we will be presenting, and we have several schools, a number of schools, over a dozen now, supporting the implementation of a pilot to make those connections more stronger, and we'll be working with you on that. Just a couple of things in closing. We certainly believe in the 3 R's of rigor, relevance, and relationships, and we're trying to live those, but we add a 4th R, and it's back to the urgency. We believe in the 4th R of real-time responsiveness, both in dealing with the students in terms of an assessment process and in dealing with the labor market and schools to employers and making rapid adjustments there as things change very quickly. In general, in closing, we support, as you might gather, scoring systems that emphasize college and career readiness. We think those are the same systems. We think that's the same readiness. We don't think it's something that divides us. We think it's something that brings us together. Most of our employers say you're going to need post-secondary education to be ready for the jobs I'm creating in the next 5 years. So we believe that is the ground we need to be working in, and we look forward to working with the Department of Education to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy Campbell.
Thank you. My name is Amy Campbell. I'm from Martinsville, and I have a letter from the principal at Martinsville High School that I would like to read. He writes, I am writing to express my strong concern for the proposed method of evaluating elementary and middle schools. First of all, in any norm-referenced model, there are always, automatically, certain percentages of schools that are placed in their categories due to the nature of the bell curve. As scores improve for schools across the state, the percentage of failing schools always remains the same. I continue to object against what I consider to be a failure model approach to determine accountability in Indiana public schools. While certainly there are school districts in need of improvement, there are countless schools and districts throughout the state that are doing outstanding jobs in the classrooms and demonstrating strong test scores. While we continue to talk about the need for strong schools and an educated workforce, we have continued to publicly decry our public schools statewide as failures when that is far from accurate. How can we possibly expect to attract business, industry, and commerce to Indiana when we have set up an evaluation model that demonstrates failing schools? I strongly encourage considerably more input, thought, and discretion for schools to demonstrate growth and improvement in any state evaluation process. Sincerely, Don Alkire, Principal, Martinsville High School. Then I also have something I would like to say from me. As I began thinking about what I would say today, I found it very difficult to limit what I would say. There's so much going on in my mind dealing with all of the education reform. The proposed grading scale to grade schools by assigning a letter grade is unfair and confusing. In a time where our state is trying to be visionary and leaders in education reform, this proposal is absurd. Colorado and Indiana would be the only states grading schools in this manner. Other states know better. I thought about this proposal from 3 viewpoints. First of all, I'm a teacher. I have 27 students in my class this year with varying degrees of ability. I have 4 LD students, 1 student with autism, 7 in speech, 1 with cerebral palsy. Under this proposal, 9 of my students would be considered failing regardless of how well they performed on a test. How could I tell my students that they are failures based on 1 test score? Students are unpredictable test takers. There are variables in their lives that they can't control, variables that I can't control. Did they have breakfast? Did mom and dad get into a fight this morning? Did they get any sleep at all last night? Did they sleep in the car? And the list goes on. In my 20 years of teaching, I never dreamed of the changes that are ahead in public education and the negative impact that I believe many of these changes will have. As a parent of 3 teenage sons, 14, 16, and 18, if any one of my sons came home from school and said, "Hey mom, I've got this test tomorrow and my grade for the entire year depends on this test," and I knew that a third of the kids would be failing no matter what, I would be furious. I would be on the doorsteps of any teacher that told my child that. My son Corbin is a senior at Martinsville High School. In 3rd grade, he was diagnosed with a learning disability. He was a horrible test taker. He would be in the bottom third. Yet today, Corbin excels. He is taking AP and ACT classes. He's college bound, and I have no doubt that he will be successful. Excuse me, I'm passionate about this. I can't imagine what would have happened to him if he had been told that he was a failure. And that would have happened. In the last several days, I have spoken to several friends and parents. And I've tried to explain this proposal to them, and they are in shock that something like this would be considered. This morning, I asked my 3 sons while they were getting ready for school what they thought of this proposal. And I think, out of the mouths of babes, but they said, "Mom, that's stupid." I beg you to think about what you are doing. Basing a school's grades solely on 1 test is not a good idea. We in Indiana are trying to be leaders, but this would be leading in the wrong direction. Thanks.
Thank you. Tammy and Megan.
That's not mine, that's another one for submission. So. In 2005, I left the business world to become a teacher. I graduated with honors from IUPUI in May, and I've not been able to secure a job yet because of the lack of jobs in the teaching profession. I did this because I want to make a difference. But how can I possibly do that when I'm potentially going into a system that's going to be obtaining a failing grade? I've seen students who have test anxiety. If they do badly, I look bad, the school fails. How's that for pressure on a 10-year-old? I have a student that the other day sat down to take a practice test, and he could barely concentrate. I had to sit with him while he sat and was a nervous wreck. I took the practice I-STEP myself the other day, and there were teachers who were nervous about taking it. So think of how it feels like when you're a 10-year-old with the weight of that on your shoulders. The new system would make that even more difficult. As a new teacher, frankly, and I think the other educators in this room can think this way, in the back of your mind you're thinking, why would I want a student in my class that I already know is not going to perform well? On the other hand, I think, aren't I here to make a difference? But my school, my job, and my students all depend on this child and their test-taking abilities. Isn't this also discrimination? Isn't that another thing that we fight against? A couple of years ago, I attended the RIPA hearings. The majority of the attendees were against the proposed changes. Here we are again, 3 years later, and
we're discussing another way to see our schools, our teachers, and our students being set up for failure. This is not the difference that I intend to make, and that is why I disagree with this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Randy Taylor.
I want to thank the board this morning. I'm Randy Taylor, Assistant Superintendent for the Martinsville School District, representing also Superintendent Dr. Ron Furness and Assistant Superintendent Jerry Sanders. We recognize that advancements in technology have revolutionized the world as written and verbal communications is instantaneously transmitted to most any place on earth, and the time it takes to traverse our globe has been greatly reduced. These and other technological advancements have driven us closer to the reality of the global village while greatly increasing competition for economic advantage among nations. And we recognize that a strong educated workforce is critical for our state to compete economically. We hold that Indiana schools have accepted the challenge and are working to educate our students to the best of their and our abilities to help them in Indiana compete. The persons filling the workforce mentioned are our students, and we want them to be competitive, well-educated, happy, successful, contributing adults. It is about the students and their futures, and it always has been. It is with this mindset that we believe that there's a better way to cheer than to boo, that we question the logic of those who propose grading schools A through F, based solely on the standardized tests for mathematics and English language arts. What happened to creativity, patience, commitment, perseverance, citizenship, teamwork, and trustworthiness, among others? What happened to science, social studies, foreign language, the arts, and physical education? Do they not matter? Going further, the conceptual framework of the grading system as proposed is flawed. Quoting Dr. Vic Smith, because the rules are based on a norm reference model, no matter how good our schools are, only 34% of our elementary and middle schools can be classified as high growth. It's a quota, grading on a curve that penalizes the remaining 66% of schools, even if they are outstanding. That is akin to judging the Olympic Games where the best in the world are competing and declaring that the top 3 are A's and the bottom 3 are F's. It makes no sense at the Olympics to declare the bottom 3 participating as failures or schools in the state of Indiana as failures when, by definition, the norm reference quota system, that there will always be 34% at the bottom regardless of how well they perform. Teaching and learning is a human interaction between teachers and students. If teachers work hard at their jobs by effectively planning, utilizing best practices, instructional techniques, and taking ownership of and caring about their students' success, and if students work hard at their jobs of being students, reading the materials assigned, showing up for the class, ready to work, paying strict attention in class, and studying, quality learning will occur. And we agree that a teacher is the most important person in the classroom, but you cannot negate the importance of attitude and the effort put forth by the student, the attitude and support of her parents, or the attitude and support of the community at large. All stakeholders play a vital role in the educational process, and all stakeholders must be actively and positively involved for it to be successful. Perhaps we should concern ourselves with positively mobilizing all stakeholders, hold all stakeholders accountable, and yet be more encouraging and more hesitant to point the finger of blame. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Bolin.
Good morning. I want to thank you for your patience and also strong bladders. That is quite impressive. Ms. Blackhair, thank you for being here too as a board member. I am Eric Bolin. I have 3 hats I'm wearing today. I'm a parent of a 10-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son. I'm also a city councilman. I'm a Republican that sits on the city council in Martinsville, and I am a principal of Martinsville East Middle School. So I have many hats. The one I'm going to point out here for a moment is my Republican hat as a city councilman. You've heard some people talk about jobs and transferring our kids from the school environment to the job world, and that is a very important component of what we do every day in the schools. I had the opportunity to speak with a banker just about a month ago, and he's a regional banker of a very good bank, strong bank, and I'm talking to him because of economics. As a city councilman, we're trying to bring economic emphasis to our city, brought a couple of businesses into our city, and we've had some discussion along this very line with education. And at Chili's in Martinsville, had a nice little discussion with him, asking him, what is it you're looking for in an employee? And he said, Eric, you know, I've made a lot of mistakes in my 34 years in this field of hiring. But here's what it's boiling down to. It boils down to somebody that can show and demonstrate empathy, somebody who will be a great team player, somebody who will show up every day, and it'll be somebody who can do some problem solving. And I looked at him and I said, you know, that's what I thought too. That's exactly where I came from the business world. But do you know what we do now in education? We teach to a test. All those things you're talking about are not on our ISTEP test. Gerald Bracy wrote before he passed away, we test what we can and we come to value what we test. And he looked at me and he said, you mean? And I said, yeah, this is exactly what I mean. We do it all on one test. That's what we base everything on. And I think the thing that we lose is creativity. The thing that we lose is the ability to think outside the box. I talk to teachers, prospective teachers, every semester down at IU. In my field, I get to do that. And they're starting to feel that pressure at the college level of what's it going to be like when I get into the school. And I said, here's what you're going to face. They're going to tell you what to teach, how to teach it, when to assess it. They're going to tell you all those things. What happened to that creativity? Whenever I have student teachers come into my building, I want their ideas. I want their ingenuity. I want their passion. I want their creativity. That's what I want in the building so that I can take their ideas and mesh it with our good master teachers, and I have a great environment for educational learning taking place in my building. Not only do the students have a better environment, my staff has a better environment. It's collegial. It's working together. It is trying to create an environment that would push these students further, faster than anybody else. That's what we're trying to accomplish at Martinsville East Middle School. Now, I stand before you as the proud principal of Martinsville East Middle School, one of those schools that's an A school that was restricted to a C. And I want to personalize that for you, just for a brief moment. It was because of participation that we failed AYP. Participation in special education and participation in free and reduced. What numbers are we talking about? We're talking about 4 children. That's what we're talking about. 4 children is all we could have in special education who would not, if they did not take the test, we would fail AYP. Now let me give you the 4 children. One of them was in the hospital. One of them comes to school about once every 2 weeks, and it is the best day of her 2 weeks because she physically can't do it. One of them had transferred to our school from California, and he was in an alternative setting in California, but with our guidelines, you have to have them in the school and then go through all the steps before you can provide an alternative setting in Indiana. So he was in our school, and he stabbed me with a pencil. Luckily, it wasn't a child or another one of the students. So he was removed from the school setting and refused to take the test. You can see what I'm talking about. And another student was removed from the school setting because of a extenuating circumstance outside school, battery offense. They did not take the test. 4. We can only have 3.5, not take it with our numbers. So we didn't get to 95%, therefore East Middle School, scoring an A, scored C. Now, how's that tie into what I've already talked about? I've had discussions with businesses wanting to come to Martinsville. And 2 discussions I've had with prospective businesses have talked about the school and the school surroundings and the school scoring. And actually, one of them brought up the fact that our secondary schools were all C's, mine being one of them. And whenever I pointed that out to them, they shook their heads in astonishment after I explained it. And it's like, you got to be kidding. And I said, no, but the point of the problem is we have to save 1 starfish at a time, and we can't do it in mass numbers. And I have to get to people to be able to explain it to them so they can understand what we're doing. Therefore, that transparency component is totally out the window. And that right there is disheartening as a councilman, that people look at just the box scores and they don't look for the details, and we know that. That's the way society is. That's what we're faced with. We missed on free and reduced numbers. We were supposed to have only 12 that could miss out of our numbers, and we had 14. These 4 kids I've already told you about, all were free and reduced as well, so that would have dropped our number down. And one of them that we had that did not make it died. She took the March test, did not take the May test. We were held accountable for that. Now, you might say, well, there's a waiver system for that. Yes, it was in place, and you had to have the numbers in by August 5th. Our school doesn't start until August, let's see, it was August 14th, I think, this year, Mr. Taylor, or something like that. Therefore, our guidance counselors were not in to be able to file that. I was on vacation, thank God, after going through the march we went through. I was grateful to get out of the school and out of Indiana for a while, just to recoup my bearings, so to speak. So those are the children we're talking about. These are kids we're talking about. They're not numbers. To you guys, you looked at the numbers and said they didn't have 95% passing. Therefore, they're going to be capped at a C. That I testified about last time. I think it was a little over a year ago. I testified about that same thing about AYP tying to it. And I was grateful to hear that we were going to be going away from that. But whenever I looked at the plan, it shows that the participation numbers are still there. And the cells grew from 30 in a cell to 40 in a cell. So we might say we're not part of the AYP system, but we're using the same thing the feds used that we said was ridiculous to tie schools to. We're turning around and backdooring it and putting it in place again ourselves, which doesn't make any sense to me. If you can come up with a better waiver system, or if you can come up with a better way to identify the children and give us a time, why have it August 5th? It was an arbitrary time set. Why couldn't it have been September 1st, whenever most schools are back in session, so that you can actually analyze and get a waiver? Just a suggestion in that vein. I do appreciate being able to be here to mention this. Feel free, if any of you would like to call and talk to somebody that's in the trenches that knows what's going on, I'd be glad to speak with any of you, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. It sounds like maybe we should take a brief recess so folks can make their way to the restrooms, etc. Why don't we take 10 minutes, which would put us back in here. Okay, let's take like 12 minutes. And that would put us back in here at 12:05. I'll be over here and I can share some restroom passes for folks who need it. Thanks. The next person that I have signed up to speak is Eric Bolin.
He just spoke.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't check him off. Justin Oakley.
Thank you. Stuck on a chair. Well, I know when I tell my daughter to sit still, she has some trouble. So I appreciate you guys being here and everybody that's here. That was it's been a testing morning. I'm here today because I'm a teacher and a dad, and I had great parents and wonderful teachers. We're in the James Whitcomb Riley room, and I'd like to read a quote that he has. He said, "When I see a bird that walks like a duck and swims like a duck and quacks like a duck, I call that bird a duck." I would never recite that with a bunch of 8th graders, but I thought it was fitting for in here today. This is why I'm here today. My folks and my teachers taught me a valuable lesson you could never measure on any standardized test. To stand up for what I believe in, even if I was standing alone, and obviously I'm not, and especially when I knew something was wrong. Folks, this proposal's wrong. And you need to get it right. If you truly believe that using 2 subjects on one test with guaranteed quotas is a best practice, as does Dr. Bennett, who should be here today to hear this, I say you pilot it first. Don't try to fix a plane in midair, trying to save you from a cataclysmic crash here. This is too important to get wrong. There's too much at stake. Every community in Indiana will live or die by this proposal. I ask one question. Why would you set a quota of guaranteed failure in a proposal that's supposed to improve success? It doesn't add up. And folks, if a history teacher can spot the problems in the math here, something's wrong. Listen, if I applied this grading system to my classes next year, which my superintendent already said I couldn't, in this current form, no parent in Indiana would put their child in my class. So why would you put all of Indiana's children in this situation? It's wrong. As a parent of a little girl, I shudder to think of her being subjected to this experimental injustice. We don't have to do this. We don't. There's got to be a better way. Indiana's better than this. Look around this room. Listen to the concern in our voices. Read your emails. We are good people who care about our kids. And if you truly care about kids and want to stand up for kids in Indiana, I suggest you sit on this proposal until it's right. It could be wrong otherwise. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Tim Lisco. The next, Sue Arrington.
I'm Sue Arrington from Muncie and a former state senator. There are 5 of us who came from Muncie in the driving rain, and none of us were intending to testify, but I thought it was a sign-up sheet for attendance. But after listening to what's been said, I felt like Muncie needed to speak out too. We have innovative programs at our schools as well. We've heard from some of the other communities that have talked about theirs. And when I think of our public schools, our neighborhood schools, they are laboratories for innovation. And when I look at this proposed rule, it seems like, along with other things I've been seeing coming out of the State Department of Education, there's a real drive to stifle and just stand in line and take orders from the state. What I think we need is what I thought we had, and that was a partnership between the state and the local school officials and the community, because the community is definitely a part of this too. One of the reasons that Muncie Community Schools is being able to do some of these new innovations is because of the support of the community, both Ball State, the city, and neighborhood organizations. And I think that's what's going to do more to create success for our students than something that comes down from the state that says, well, this % of schools in our state are going to be successes and an equal % is going to be failures. And I don't think that's what's happening in our state. I think if you got out, you would see in many corners of the state that there are community members and school people, teachers and administrators, and local governments that are working together to make successes of their students, because they know that the success of their community depends on well-educated students who are ready to get out into and prepared to either go on to further college or to be prepared for a job. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy Fuentes Rohr.
Hi, my name is Kathy Fuentes Rohr. I'm here as a parent of 4 children in public schools. I represent many of my friends who can't be here at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday because they're busy at work or at home caring for their children, but I'm sure there are hundreds of people across the state in our shoes. I'm deeply concerned about these efforts towards reform, which directly affect my kids or our kids. This morning I'm speaking specifically to this new grading system for elementary and middle schools, which is setting up 1/3 of them to fail. When I tell my friends and neighbors that this grading system is based on a curve, they're shocked. A curve sees, as everybody said before, 34 plus, not making the bar. Now, I'm a product of public schools, so I can think critically, and I can only assume that this is designed exactly for that purpose, or else somebody wasn't thinking. And I can only then assume that the agenda is to take away our local control of public schools and make them turn them into privately run charter schools or have them taken over by private companies. I believe education should see the child as the center of policy. And if you have the child as the focus, then you are meeting him or her where he or she is on the developmental continuum. We should be looking at the whole child, not just a test score. An evaluation of schools should be based on their improvement wherever they are. It's not an equal or level playing field for all children, and they don't learn in a vacuum. We must be fair to all schools and all children. My own children are so much more than a test score, and my school is their schools, caring environments of learning, not a factory or a business. And my children's education is not a commodity. I would hope that we as citizens of this democracy would be supporting public schools as the cornerstone of that democracy, not trying to turn them into a for-profit venture and designing them to fail.
Gina Carney.
Good afternoon. My name is Gina Carney, and I'm from Bloomington, Indiana, and I'm the parent of 3 children who have all attended public school. I believe that evaluating schools should be based on improvement, not on performance. Demanding that schools meet the proposed performance standards in order to receive a passing grade is short-sighted and irresponsible. Using this grading system to measure performance could incentivize administrators and teachers to target students who are more likely to pass a test, leaving the neediest students behind. As a parent, I'm concerned about what this system means for public schools. I've been a very active member of my school community for 9 years, and I've witnessed a transformation in my school. In what was once a passionate, creative, and supportive community, I now feel that teachers and administrators have become fearful and anxious at the possibility of a state takeover. I worry this fear will be passed on to students, to my children. Teachers must be supported to inspire and encourage students and to hold every child to a high expectation. This model prevents that from occurring. I urge the board to reconsider these rules and to support schools by evaluating them on their efforts and results based on improvement. Thank you.
Jeff Caldwell.
My name is Jeff Caldwell. I'm a member of the Board of School Trustees for Bartholomew Consolidated Corporation, and I was the executive that Mr. Baker was talking about with Cummins as well. Just got the chance to speak to you last month. I want to highlight what I think are a couple of flaws in the approach to evaluating these schools, and they're rooted really in the fact that I applaud data-driven, but we've taken some of the basic assumptions behind the statistics around this and gone far afield right out of the gate. Now, I also applaud the growth-based changes to the ISTEP scores, but at the end of the day, it's still an ISTEP standardized test-based score. So in the spirit of being data-driven, statistical disciplines teach us that some variation is normal. Understanding the source of that variation is the real challenge and the beginning of finding real lasting solutions. So this current approach of assigning grades from a new every year population of students and then attributing positive or negative movement to the quality of the educational staff in the school that's there is a whole lot like blindfolding somebody, putting a dartboard on the wall, then moving the dartboard and telling them that it's their lack of skill that caused the dart to miss. It's similar to that kind of thing. It's just not solid, statistically data-based thinking. This misapplication of logic, it was never more apparent to me than reading Dr. Bennett's recent commentary on the Board of Education website about teacher evaluation. Now, I realize we're not talking about teacher evaluation here, but I see the same root kind of thinking in both the words and the logic coming out of this board on teacher evaluation that I do on evaluating schools. He talks about the fact that there's no mandate for moving teachers to the 4 quartiles of highly effective, needing improvement, and ineffective. But he also notes that it's impossible, statistically impossible, to think that 90% of our teachers would fall in the top 2 categories. I'm old enough to remember MASH, and Colonel Potter said bull hockey, right? I mean that's what that is. That's just absolutely ridiculous thinking. I let me give you an example from my real world at Cummins. I make and sell diesel engines. If Cummins allowed anyone selected from a random sample, let's take a random sampling from the rest of us here in the class, to come in and design our engines, and then we let another random sampling of people off the street put them together, it's reasonable to expect that we'd have highly effective, somewhat effective, needs improvement, and ineffective. It's also reasonable to assume that we'd be out of business very quickly because people would be taking a crapshoot at ours. But what we do is we take the best engineers from Purdue and Rose-Hulman and other engineering schools and other programs. We provide them additional training and oversight. And this oversight comes from former engine designers and engine developers themselves. And we give them a structure, and then we allow them to go apply their creativity that they've been trained to use in college and put the engine together. Then we go hire production workers, and because we're a private company, we do have the ability to pre-screen and test for aptitude, mechanical aptitude, but yet we train them again. We give them structure, we give them processes, and we put together what I think are the best diesel engines in the world. So to suggest that our current school educators come from this random sampling population, as opposed to they come from our state university education programs and private university education programs and out-of-state university education programs, but they've been trained, they've been prepared, they've been tested and certified. They have a structure. And these people are the equivalent of those engineers at Cummins that we employ to design our engines. The administrators are the equivalent of those managers, experienced educators who can provide the guidance that's needed. And you know, I think at the end of the day, we wind up with a new exciting generation of educators ready to come in and energized to teach the next generation of students. The punchline is over 90% of those better be effective because, or highly effective, because if they're not, it reflects an incredible waste of time, energy, and money on their part and our university system's part. The second logical flaw that I saw in assumptions was that unlike Cummins, in the public school system, you're required to take everybody that's willing to come. Ability is kind of an extra bonus, but everyone that's willing to be there is welcomed in. And yet, at the last January 4th board meeting 2 weeks ago, there was a really spirited discussion on the impact of charter or other non-public schools and their evaluations should that school be inundated with an influx of students who, let's call them underachievers, from the public school. These underachievers would subject these poor, unsuspecting charter or voucher-accepting private schools to, and I quote nearly verbatim here, an unfair reflection of the school's ability, dragging down their ISTEP Plus scores unfairly because it's unrealistic to believe the school could induce significant or sufficient improvement in 1 year and 3 months or less on this implied underperforming student. Now, folks, I'm pretty confident here I can speak for every elementary and secondary public school teacher and administrator in the state of Indiana when I say, what the heck do you think we've been talking about? One elementary school in Bartholomew County received an F grade. They're working with 45% mobility student ratio. In a school of 600 children, with 270 of those being different than at the end of the year than the 600 started at the beginning of the year, that's nearly 8 new chances every week to mess up, to be unfairly reflected upon. And yet, this board is consistently voted on a monthly basis to let the hammer fall on these failing public schools because, you know, it's the statistics, the data supports it. Some people are arguing to protect the schools then that have the ability to say no thank you to these students when they don't meet their entry criteria. Shame on all of us if we let that happen. The recent move to include some of these measures that better attribute school performance for scores demonstrating growth, it's commendable, but it's just not enough. So for me, the bottom line is I don't think anyone wants to duck accountability. It's not always pleasant, but I think most of us get it, that straight talk at the end of the day leads to a better world. So let me give you my version of straight talk. We can't visit classrooms for 20 minutes and pretend we get it. Excuse me. Since we're a fan of statistics, I would suggest that you randomly select public elementary and secondary classrooms around the state in D and F schools and walk a mile in their shoes. Teach the class for a week. You'll conclude pretty quickly that defining Miss Smith's
or Mr. Jones's mastery of third grade English composition or Algebra 1 and their ability to teach it as the primary cause of good or bad performance. That usually pales in comparison to the fact that little Ben's family just moved for the third time this school year, one step ahead of the landlord or maybe the sheriff. Little Anna's single mom is too tired to help with homework after working 2 jobs, or maybe Miss Smith and Mr. Jones, who are dealing with a mainstream high-performing autistic student or a borderline ED kid who commands 40% of their attention each day. They're just trying to keep that child in the system and give that child some chance. Maybe these are the really impactful challenges our teachers, administrators are being asked to wrestle to the ground. I'm not making excuses. I just know that an annual standardized test as the basis, even with improvement, for evaluating the quality of education, well, as one gentleman just said, it's just wrong. The insane grades based primarily on I-STEP scores approach has to be shelved. I encourage you to step back, readjust your thinking, and move away from this empty kind of quantification of the problem and join in with the local school boards and private and public engaged entities to explore how to address root causes, to reach all these individuals, not just focusing on punishing our educators. Thank you.
Terry Barker.
That's a tough act to follow, let me tell you, Matt. Well done. My name is Terry Barker. I'm the superintendent for School City of Mishawaka since October of 2011, also a proud resident of South Bend. Thank you for making the drive down. And to the board members watching online, appreciate that as well. I'm here today to ask the board to reject the proposal provided by the Department of Education to change the grading formula for Indiana schools, or at least table the approval until such time that the grading formula proposed is finalized and communicated clearly to all schools in the state. I've considered multiple ways to begin this testimony in search of the eloquence that would convince the board to reject or at least table the request to change the administrative rules regarding PL 221 and the 8F grading formula proposal. However, if the eloquence and passion of a leader like Dr. Eugene White last year could not convince you to alternatives to private business takeover of public education, I'm not sure that there are words that can be spoken today to dissuade the board or the state superintendent of public instruction from continuing on a path that will lead to making public education little more than a business deal for profit-oriented entrepreneurs. So again, I will simply ask and hope that I might at least provide some points that might cause you to consider my request that if you do not pass this proposal to change the way schools are graded in Indiana using the proposed A to F framework, why would I ask this? Let me begin by stating that we all have heard in our districts that the quality of schools and the reporting of their effectiveness or ineffectiveness should be transparent. I agree. If only 75% of your students are passing English or mathematics assessments with a pass or pass plus, that's pretty transparent that improvements are still needed. Based upon grading standard grading practices, that would equate to a school or district receiving a C or a D plus, depending upon the stringency of the grading scale. If only 20 to 30% of the students are passing, then that is pretty obvious as well, and should indicate that the state superintendent and state board and the DOE itself should invest their time in changing how those districts should be operating from a perspective of contract language restrictions or local board of trustees decision making. The proposed grading framework is anything but transparent. The final grade may be easy to understand at face value, but the calculations that may be used are anything but transparent or simple to do. Please consider the following. At a November meeting with the state superintendent and his cabinet members, a group of superintendents requested that the grades for their schools and their corporations be run so that the sample comparison could be made between the old grades and the new grades based upon the new formula. We were told that they could do that and that would work on providing that prior to the common winter break for most of the schools. and prior to this hearing. At the end of December, I learned that the DOE officers decided that they would not provide that information. No explanation was given. At a later meeting in January, the same superintendents were told the calculations were not done because the DOE officers responsible for doing that for the new grading formula were unsure of the variables and that they may be changed or adjusted, so they didn't want us to hang our hat on anything that would be told to us. Are you ready to approve a framework that is still in need of validation and adjustments? Being the type of curious and concerned superintendent that I am, I wanted to see if I could apply the formula given to the schools and determine our grades under the new formula. We ran the numbers for 4 schools: the high school, our middle school, and 2 of our 7 elementaries, using the proposed formula with its current variables. Our high school would come in at a C+ or a B, we believe. Our middle school would remain a D. We have some work to do there. We don't deny that. Our 2 elementary schools, one 4-star and one that just missed being a 4-star school by 1 or 2 points, should be A schools under the new formula. The accuracy of all these grade designations depends on what adjustments may or may not occur with the formula and depend upon what data and how the data will be used by the DOE. You see, it won't be the districts or the schools that will do the calculations. It will be the DOE, and they aren't ready to provide that calculation to give schools an idea of where they may be based upon the new formula for determining a grade. Is that really transparent? I don't believe so, and surely you can't either. Realizing the DOE might be shorthanded, the administrators who did the calculations for our schools, the ones that I cited here, spent approximately 15 to 20 hours sorting through the websites and student data locations now provided to schools and the public. Again, not really transparent. They provided me with the work they did, but they did not feel confident in what they had used, as there is really very little guidance being provided by the DOE at this time, other than sharing that we are just operating under new paradigms right now. A call was placed to the department in charge of assessment and accountability. No response was given, and the calls made were never answered to, no reason given. It wasn't apparent to us, or it wasn't transparent to us. A general email to the AYP website garnered a response from a key cabinet member, and the key cabinet member provided a sample random point values that could be plugged into the formula without any explanation of the origin of the point values. Again, not really transparent. I believe the process and the frustration of working with the proposed grading process are best expressed in the memorandum provided to me from my curriculum and instruction department administrators. I'm not going to read it all. It's in Appendix F. I've provided it for you on the last page, and I'm just going to identify their notes. Having plugged in all the formula, they said it was very difficult to find the data. We did find it in the Learning Connection, but it wasn't in a format conducive to the rubric. We contacted the IDOE assessment office, and the first individual had no idea where to find the data. She recommended we contact one of the administrators. To date, we have not heard from him. This morning we called again, and they told us to write the AYP at DOE, but again, it was not helpful. Once again, an administrator responded, but unfortunately gave us a sample chart of how the DOE calculates the combined passing rate. He failed to tell us where this information is located for our schools. In summary, the rubric has a top point value of 4, but our calculations, both for Hums and Twin Branch, receives scores higher than 4. We were skeptical that our calculations will match up with the DOE's, but this is our best estimate based upon the information available. Just to calculate these 2 schools was very time-consuming. I don't mind change. I relish it. I know, and I'm willing to bet, that most of the superintendents, principals, board members, teachers, and parents in this room are committed to continuous progress and change in order to provide students continuous and improved opportunities to excel and reach their potentials. I'm not against accountability or competition. I'm against non-transparent standards, formulas, and changing rules mid-year. Give me rules, the guidelines, the expectations, but give them up front so that I can work with my professionals to meet the demands and the expectations set before us. In this case, however, I don't believe schools will ever be in a win-win setting, as the proposed formula is based upon a bell curve distribution that will always produce a bottom quartile of failures and a top quartile of successes, regardless of the overall success of schools and the success of children. To clarify, it will never be possible to celebrate growth and achievement of students because the proposed calculations that 34% will be designated as failing, and 34% will be determined to be successful. Under the proposed formula, we will always be able to identify a population of students and schools as failures, something that I don't believe is true or transparent by anyone's accurate measure. I want to thank you for your time and consideration. It is my sincere hope, at the very minimum, the board will vote to delay any implementation of the proposed A to F grading system until that time that it can truly be said that it is transparent. Thank you.